Are we ready to do this?
Yes, ma'am.
Outstanding. Welcome everybody for joining us on Break Everything. This is a conversation where we are going to challenge the status quo, the intent of making a positive impact. I'm Lisa L. Levy, the founder of L Cubed Consulting. I'm a speaker and an author. And for the sake of today, I'm generally just kind of a curious person. I have with me today three outstanding gentlemen who are subject matter experts in their domain areas and thought leaders. And our conversation today is about measuring what matters, looking at the metrics we have inside our business and trying to figure out if they're really adding value and making an impact. I'll let you know one thing: if you're expecting to walk away with a list of metrics that will run your business successfully, it's just not that easy. But our promise and our commitment to you is that we are going to help you think differently and come at your business with a new perspective so that you can figure out what to measure and why it matters. The format for today's session is a roundtable panel. Each of the panelists will share some of their perspectives and their thoughts, and we'll take about 30 minutes. At the end of that, we're going to open it up, bring everybody in so we can turn on cameras and microphones and have a conversation and a dialogue with everybody who's in the audience so that we can get to some more specifics for you. To get us started, I would like to introduce the panelists. And I ask for your grace in this. I want to read their bios so that I give them full credit for all of the amazing things that they do. I am a big fan of each of these gentlemen, and I don't want to miss a thing. Our panelists today start with Jim Hardwick, who helps companies create a sustainable process to generate profitable revenue. Jim is passionate about helping small to medium-sized businesses understand their sales situation, developing solutions to improve and grow their revenue through a simple and disciplined approach. Jim has more than 25 years of sales leadership experience in small family businesses, mid-sized companies, and large Fortune 500s. Jim enjoys working with engaged entrepreneurs who are committed to cultural transformations that produce high-performing sales teams who are collaborative, take ownership, and deliver results. Jim, I look forward to hearing from you in a few minutes. Thank you for being here. Our second panelist today, Mark Boundy, draws on 25 years wide-ranging experience in sales, marketing, new product development, and product management. He helps his clients find, win, and keep more business more profitably. He's led firms to be value and price leaders in a wide variety of product and service industries. His approach focuses on the most important part of sales and marketing, the one most companies do poorly: customer value. The topic is so important and impactful, Mark authored Radical Value: Elevate Your Company and Career by Unleashing the Power Within Customer Centricity. Our third panelist today, Mark Hinderliter, is a 35-year veteran of business working in multiple industries. Mark was previously Senior Vice President of Human Resources for a $1 billion global industrial service company. He is an executive coach and business owner. Mark holds a PhD in organization and management and is a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks. It's an ideal fusion of academic and industry experience. Mark is a believer in long-term, lifelong learning. His passion and purpose are simply to teach and inspire leaders to create workplaces that people love and are proud to be a part of. Those three panelists give us three very specific and distinct perspectives when we start talking about what matters in a business. At this point, I would like to invite Jim to join me. Thank you so much, Jim.
Good morning, Lisa.
And the floor, sir, is yours.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here this morning. And I'm going to talk about sales, and I offer what's called an investment sales analysis report. And this is really for private equity, mergers and acquisition companies that are going to go in and purchase a company. But having said that, it's really the foundation of any sales organization that's out there. And let me explain what happens a lot of times when a company's going to buy another company. Is they will go in and they will do their due diligence, and they usually send in these young, smart kids out of college, and they work 24 hours a day to get all the analysis from the financial standpoint. And so they understand the finances of the business inside and out. What they don't do quite often is take a look at what's going on in the sales world. And this report, this analysis, does 16 critical sales drivers. I was working for a large company, about $1 billion laboratory company a few years ago. And they went out, and it was very financially driven, okay? Finance. And they went out and they went to go buy a company smaller than them, thinking that it would be a complement to their business. And it was amazing because they did the due diligence, they bought the company. What they found out 3 months later was it wasn't a compliment. They really had purchased the competitor. And fine, it was a competitor, but it was such a small competitor calling on the exact same customers, there was no reason to buy it. And so since the principals had basically lied to them in order to get the sale through, and they were supposed to stay for the smaller company for up to a year for the transitional period, no, our company sent people down there, they locked the doors, fired the people in charge, and took over immediately because they basically been hoodwinked. That's $1 billion organization that didn't take the time to find out what their sales strategy was, who was their customer. And so that just shows you, it blows your mind. If you don't have any company, if it's a startup, if it's a company that's been on for 3 to 5 years, whatnot, if you don't have that foundation for sales, it's hard to sustain it, it's hard to grow the revenue, and it's hard to make it work efficiently. Next slide. So the benefits for this type of things is when you look and do the due diligence on your company and look at the sales aspect, you're going to get a greater return on your investment. Bottom line, a greater return on your investment. If you have an existing company and you need to evaluate your sales organization, people bring me in to look at what's going on in their sales. My job is to grow the revenue. You're going to get a greater return, which in turn goes to a better batting average. If you've got the right sales team in place, if you've got the right compensation in place, if you've got the right sales process in place, you got a CRM, all the foundational things that a lot of companies lack. But if you have that, you have a better batting average of winning. You also are going to uncover the hurdles, the roadblocks, things that if you don't do the due diligence, you're going to be blindsided. And that happens so often. I heard of another situation where a company went in and they heard once they purchased them or about ready to sign the documents, they were going to lose the largest customer in the next 90 days. Wow. And the deal did go through, but almost did not. So that's a scary, scary thing. It depends on how large that customer is. That could be 50% of business, which is also a scary thing. When you do your analysis, it enables you to walk away. You get emotional on some of these things, and I want to own this, or it's great from a strategy standpoint. But once you can do your analysis and truly understand what you're purchasing, then you can decide if you need to go through the purchase or not. The other thing is, and this is for an existing sales organization, when you do and take a look and do some analysis on it, you can understand what you need to work on. One of the things that I do is I have a 40 question questionnaire that people fill out, so we can really fine tune and get to what they need help on, and then we can compare them to their peers so we can figure out what to tackle first. And then lastly, and this is so true, and I'll slam my own peers, my own group, and me. What is truth and what is optimistic opinion? Sales reps as a whole, we are optimists. If you've ever been on a pipeline review with a sales organization, everything's going to close, right? We're talking to them. Oh, I feel like I'm going to think about, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Well, that guy's been there for 6 months. It still hasn't happened. Oh, it's going to happen next month. That's typically the way salespersons think. They're always optimists that it's going to close. They're not asking the right questions. They're not doing enough deep dive. They haven't done enough discovery to really, truly understand. And a lot of times they're not even talking to the person that can say yes. If you talk to a CFO that's been around a sales organization for long enough in a company, once he gets the pipeline or the forecast from the sales team, a lot of times they'll cut it in half or at least take 25% off the top. Then they have a realistic number. And they've learned that after years and years of having those discussions and seeing how often the sales team misses. So to wrap it up, I would say that you need to evaluate, you need to look at, and if you're really trying to grow your revenue as an existing company, or if you're going to purchase somebody, evaluate the areas that you're lacking in. Bring somebody in or do a deep dive or get some objective opinion so you can really understand what you need to do in your organization to take it to the next level. Thanks, Lisa.
Jim, I love how you started with the description of, bringing in the smart kids right out of college. I often talk about that team as the ducklings, and they come and they run around, and I always question, right, their actual context and knowledge base to make the analysis and the recommendations that are coming. So there's definitely value in your approach with the industry experience and knowledge that you are bringing to your clients. I know that Mark Boundy has a question for you. So Mark, why don't you join us, please?
Yeah, thanks. Jim, I love this analysis and the analysis, both to understand an existing company where the leaks are in your revenue machine, but as an acquisition, are there any of those metrics where you continually, when you run it, the client who asked for it to be run gets surprised, or unexpected discoveries from any of those metrics?
Yeah, I would say for me, when I come in from 37 years of sales experience, I'm amazed how poorly the compensations are written. Reps do two things: what you tell them to do and what you pay them to do. And a lot of times people write compensations the way they want to be compensated. So an engineer that runs the CEO of an engineering company, he's paying his salesperson six-figure base with the 1% commission, and he wonders why he's not getting out of bed in the morning. I mean, that is so prevalent. And I asked him point blank, why are you doing that? Well, that's the way I would like to get paid. Well, that's the way I want to get paid also, but it doesn't drive behavior. Immediately, you cut that in half, give him $50,000, but then you give him a big upside. So he has to go out and slay the dragons. That, and then the last one is accountability, the lack of accountability. Well, how long's Bill been here? 4 years. When's the last time he hit his quota or made his number? 3 years. What's the consequences? Nothing. Well, guess what? Professional sales reps know and live and know there'll be consequences if you don't perform. You cannot grow your revenue if you don't perform. And so accountability and compensation are critical, because if you can make a decent salary and you never hit your number and nobody cares and you don't lose your job, there's no incentive. So those are the two things, Mark.
Thanks.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Mark, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lisa. So I want to start out with a story that you're going to think is old news and is irrelevant, but I'm going to show you how it's not. The story took place in World War II. During World War II, in the European theater, over Europe, primarily over Germany and the Low Countries, Allied bombers were being lost at an alarming rate. And so what they decided to do is to try to see if there were little places on the bomber where they could add additional armor. So what they did, Lisa, you go ahead and put that slide up, is they had a bunch of people track the battle damage on the bombers as they came back. And so after they made a chart like this on this model of bomber, they started thinking about how they could protect those areas more, until a real smart mathematician said, time out. Although I don't think he said time out in Europe, but he said, stop. Here's the problem. You're measuring the damage on the planes that made it safely back to base. You see all those damage that isn't reported on the cockpit, on the engines, on that tail section, which is where we store the oxygen bottles, where if you hit them, it blows up in wild flames. Those are the places where the plane gets damaged and doesn't return. It's called in statistics, it calls survivor bias, measuring the wrong thing. And you think that's a cute story from the past, but let me tell you this. Remember Peter Drucker saying that the purpose of a business is to find and create a customer. Well, the way to find a customer that you're going to keep, Peter Drucker said, find and keep a customer. So the way to find a customer that is going to stay is to provide more value for that customer than it costs you to deliver. So the purpose of your business, using the transitive property, and this is what I say in my book, is the purpose of a business is to provide more value for your customers than it costs you to deliver. So now look at the metrics in your department, in your company. What metrics does the CEO track? And how many of them deal with customer value? How much value your customers perceive they achieve from doing business with you? Exactly. The answer is usually crickets. Hold off, Lisa. So the problem is, and usually people will measure something like customer satisfaction. Well, here's the problem with customer satisfaction numbers or net promoter scores. You only measure those things from the customers who have successfully returned to base. You aren't measuring customer satisfaction of the customers you thought you deserved to win and didn't. You don't get or measure perceived value when you're only measuring customer perceived value of the customers who are perceiving value. Okay, Lisa, thanks. So what I want you to think about is that you're not measuring, go ahead. The problem is we often measure what's easy to measure, because customer satisfaction is easier to measure because it's easier to find our customers than our failed customers. We don't measure, we look for things that are precise because we can precisely measure those things. A famous statistician, also one of the people who invented the word byte and was the inventor of one of the inventors of the first computer at Bell Labs, said far better approximate answer to the right question than a precise answer to the wrong question. These damage assessments were very precise, but they were the wrong question. The other thing a mistake we often make is that we use the metrics that we were brought up using. They were good enough for my boss, and they were good enough for the dead guy who was his boss. I want you to stop thinking about the metrics that are safe because your boss used them. I want you to start thinking about your business in terms of what value you're creating. Lisa, the next slide. So here's the thing. I work with my clients, and this is a lot of people do a study like this. This infinity loop represents your customer's buying journey, where on the area where they cross, going from the underneath part, the customer understands their need, then they research options, they select a product, they purchase, and they implement it. Most of that left-hand portion of the loop is our sales funnel. Think about it. Your sales funnel starts usually after the customer has started buying and ends right when the customer starts using your product. So think of a split screen where your sales team is ringing bells and high-fiving because a deal got signed. And the other split screen, the customer has just started going into cold sweats because now for the first time, they are accountable for implementing some results. And you're off to the races and you've handed them off to somebody else in your department. Your customer's decision, your customer's journey with your product actually starts there. And so now we want that to implement smoothly. We want to start using it successfully, getting expert with it, achieving results, and then figuring out what else can I do? How else can I use this? So that now you're feeding a new funnel for a cross-sell or an upsell or a referral. So this infinity loop actually represents your customer's journey. And so many times we think of only the sales involvement in the left-hand loop. I work with my customers to define this customer loop, the entire customer journey, and then to figure out who from your company helps the customer get through that phase of their journey, whether that's your installers, whether that's your implementers, whether it's your client support or customer success or training or implementation or customer support or accounts payable or tech support. All of those people are feeding a follow-on sale. Do you measure how well they are doing, or do you just measure how long the calls last? Are you measuring call resolution times? Are you not measuring call resolution quality? That could be a problem. That could be why your infinity loop is you're not thinking of your infinity loop the right way. Think about your infinity loop on how you're developing, delivering, and value and helping customers achieve outcomes. So on the, go ahead, Lisa, on some of those bullets. So for each stage, it's very typical that we define our selling actions. You know, what do your salespeople do? That everybody does that at least on the left-hand side of the funnel in your sales cycle. But now I want you to also think what a smaller number of companies do think of is what buying actions does a customer do throughout that buying cycle? And now I want you to expand that. What buying action do your customers make all throughout the infinity loop? And now what departments and rules and resources does your customer need to engage with to accomplish that trip around the flywheel, as some people call it? So I want you to be able to understand where customer value is built and with what customer stakeholders, who at the customer realizes that value, how to help build that value and how to merchandise that value with those customers. So that's my pitch for trying to rethink your business in terms of how your customers achieve value.
Mark, thank you for that perspective. Yesterday, I was having a somewhat uncomfortable conversation with a client, and they had set forth a metric that they wanted their care team to answer 100% of the incoming phone calls on a daily basis. And we kind of know that is not necessarily an achievable metric. And I asked the question, why that metric? Why is it important? She said, because I want them taken care of. I said, what do they want? Is it possible that your customers actually want that first contact to solve their problem? And it might be better to have a call back at a later time with the person who can solve that problem. And so those mindset shifts are very important. I know that Hinderliter is ready and he's got a question for you. So Mark, why don't you join us?
Everybody, Mark, so you reminded me of a Drucker quote. And one of the things Peter Drucker was famous for saying was, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So as I look at your flywheel and kind of process kind of what you're talking about in terms of, just creating value and some processes, where does culture come into play here?
Culture is one of those words where everybody thinks they know what it is, but not many people really actually define it well. Culture is the way we do things here. And I talk to a lot of leadership gurus who really specialize in telling people how to lead. And they all agree that in order to do that, you have to unify everybody around a direction, give them point them everybody in the same direction. I propose, I'm not interested in how, well, I am interested in how, but I don't work with the how. I work with the where. What is that direction? The direction should be customer achieved outcomes, value. So by organizing your entire group around customer outcomes and customer value, you're actually creating a culture that in many times your people really appreciate it. There's an old story of John Kennedy, President John Kennedy, when he toured mission control, NASA mission control for the first time. He was getting a tour and he came across a janitor and he asked the janitor, what do you do here? The janitor said, I keep the clutter and the mess out of the way of everybody so that everybody here can focus on getting those astronauts to and from the moon. The janitor knew his role in the big vision. That says something about a culture, but that was the idea was the mission. So when I think of customer value and a value-focused culture, that is the most powerful direction you can unify your people around.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mark Boundy, thank you so much for your perspectives. Mark Hinderliter, I turn the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to tell a story also, and it's really I would call the greatest lesson that I learned in my 30 plus years in the corporate world. And I call it a tale of two cultures. And it's really my experiences with two businesses that I work for. So let me talk about company number one. It's where I grew up in the corporate world. I was with this company for 20 years. And just some of the kind of things about that company is we had a CEO that really was committed to a healthy workplace culture, although we didn't talk about culture then. He really wanted a healthy workplace that people were proud to be part of. And he was also really committed to making sure we had a company where people could grow. They had a career path that they could aspire to. Actually, I was one of those people. You know, the proof's in the pudding. I started out as a human resource generalist, and 20 years later, well, before that, I became a company vice president. So, you know, that CEO's vision for the kind of workplace and opportunity really was very real. That company, there was just so much pride. And long-term tenure was the norm. My 20 years were not extraordinary. I have a buddy, a golfing buddy, who's long since retired. He worked there 40 years. So that was the kind of place it was. And so if I could kind of take workplace culture to, so what did that have to do with business results? So for the first 18 of those 20 years, year after year of profitability and year after year of growth, top line and bottom line growth. So very consistent financial performance, very consistent growth over that time period. And then 18 years into my career there, everything changed. CEO retired, new CEO came in from the outside, and very quickly it turned into a very negative workplace experience. People were not valued, not respected. Culture was not valued. This was a CEO who pretended believed that he was the smartest guy in the room and acted like it. So everybody else's thoughts and inputs and experiences were just really discounted, which really became very demoralizing. And here's kind of the thing about the direction of the company then. It was a singular focus on the bottom line. I would add to that and to the stock price. And what really suffered from that focus was the bottom line and the stock price. In fact, 9 years after the CEO took over, it was out of business. A once very successful, profitable growing company was gone, and 4,300 jobs and livelihoods vanished. And the lesson I learned there was, wow, leadership and culture have a direct impact on profitability and growth. I was so clear about that. Leadership and culture can be superpowers or they can be kryptonite. The first CEO, they were superpowers. The second one, utter kryptonite. So that was kind of my first 20 years. And I left, long before that company was ran out of business. I said to myself, I've spent 18 years helping build this business, at least do my part. I am not helping tear it down. So I left and went to work for a company in a very different industry, and kind of a similar story. We had a CEO that really was probably the smartest person in the room, but never once did I see him act like it. He really respected people. He really valued culture. And, one of the things that was kind of fun to participate in, we had these technician lunches. These were the customer facing folks that would come into headquarters for training, and we'd have technician lunches. And the CEO said this all the time. He said, folks, you are at the top of the organizational pyramid because you take care of the customer. I am at the bottom of the organizational pyramid because I've never taken care of a customer, but my job is to support you. And I will tell you, he meant that. We ran the business that way. That was his expectation of the rest of us in leadership, was And a quote from him was, "Our job as leaders is to help people be great. And most importantly, the ones taking care of our customers." So impact on the bottom line, this started before I joined the company, but under this CEO's tenure, 52 consecutive profitable quarters with pretty close to 10% year-over-year growth. Incredible financial performance, to include through the recession of 08 and 09. So once again, it just was affirmed in my mind that leadership and culture had a direct impact on performance and growth. And again, everything changed. CEO retires. I mean, this is a broken record. New CEO comes from the outside, tried to transplant former companies' practices into this company. And, the transplant was rejected. And same kind of a thing, singular focus on the bottom line. And I add the stock price to that. And what was destroyed was the bottom line and the stock price. Under this leadership, almost 4 years now, 0 profitable quarters, not 0 in a row, it was 0 total, none. And revenue down 30% over that almost 4-year period. This senior leadership team grew the business from $1.2 billion in revenue to about $850 million. So absolutely destroyed the bottom line. And the stock price has gone from about $40 a share, maybe 5 years ago, to $4 a share. And so once again, it was so clear to me from my own experiences that that culture that's led by the right leadership absolutely directs or impacts the bottom line, the stock price, if it's a public company, and the growth of the company in both directions. Great leadership, great culture, consistent profitability and growth. Misguided leadership, don't care about people and culture, destroys the bottom line and the stock price. So, those lessons couldn't be more clear to me. So, if I had a couple of takeaways I'd maybe offer up to the listeners from my own experiences. The first is the health of the workplace culture has a direct impact on business performance and growth. I've just seen it. So here's kind of a fun metric that's outside of my own experiences, but reinforces it. So according to research done by Fortune, they have a thing called their top 100 workplaces, in the country. Those companies, they've tracked over a long period of time. Every year has a new list, but those top workplaces outperform the market by 5% over a 20-year period. So same thing. Top workplace, healthy workplace culture, just outperforms the market and their competitors. And I guess the second takeaway for me is that you can measure this stuff. You can measure workplace culture, or what I call people analytics, and provide leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. Leading indicators like, how do people feel about their boss? How do people feel about, their career path? Do they feel respected? Those kinds of things are absolutely leading indicators. So,
Mark,
yeah,
I'd really like to know from your perspective and your experience, that one metric that really encapsulates the health of the culture.
there are many, Lisa, but if you made me come up with one, it's called Employee Net Promoter Score, ENPS. And basically, the question in a survey is a statement that says, I recommend this company as a great place to work to my family and friends. And then it's on a scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. So the Net Promoter Score is the advocates, how many of those there are, versus those that aren't advocates. And so the net of those is the Net Promoter Score. And the bigger the net, the higher the predictability is of a healthy workplace culture.
Thank you, Mark, so much for sharing your story and that one singular focus, that place to start. Very helpful for all of us. Thanks. For everybody listening, we have had 3 very different perspectives, but one of the things that's really clear is that people matter. and the connection and the correlation between how we stage and sell business, how we position it to our customers and the value that it offers, and how we nurture and take care of our people inside of the organization. These pieces are all critical to the success of our businesses. From my firm's perspective, we really do believe that we need to build skills and capabilities across all business functions so that we can empower teams to be able to do the right things for the customers, because there are so many more roles today that touch our customers directly. Our framework builds the foundation for that, but what's really impactful and powerful is, right, how hard it is to get all of the pieces put together when we're looking at the work that happens with the sales team and aligning that to operationally being able to deliver those results. Thinking from the outside in and understanding how customers perceive value. I want to tell a quick story about one of my clients. We had done the hard work and they were invested and they were moving forward with a customer-centric focus and an effective and efficient set of business operating principles. And then the pandemic happened. And I was chatting with them about a year ago. The vice president of finance was devastated because she felt that everything that we had built had been ignored and thrown out the window, and that her teams and the teams around her were deliberately trying to circumvent the processes, and she was shattered. And I unfortunately, I laughed. And I said, well, I want to ask you the question, are they doing it deliberately to do harm to the company? And she very passionately said, no, absolutely not. We are trying to ensure that we can take care of our customers, and they are out there doing that, but they're not coming to me for help in how to navigate the changing times. I said, all right, so we've done the hard work and you've forgotten the last step, to continuously improve, to question what you're doing and why you're doing it. In the time of the pandemic, breaking some of the financial controls to get PPE on site was absolutely the right thing to do for their customers. What they needed to do was do it on purpose and not in secret. So all of the things that we're talking about here today set the foundation for how you can build a business that is adding value to your customers, able to adapt to change, and build a culture where people are really satisfied and happy with what they do and continue to contribute to the ongoing success. I want to thank all of the panelists for being here and actually invite them back into the conversation, as we are also going to open up and bring our audience members in to join us, and we will do Q&A live with all of you. And as Polly is doing a wonderful job bringing you in, gentlemen, we've talked about the metrics that actually matter, but I want to hear from each of you about the ones that just drive you crazy. Everybody uses them and they add absolutely no value. Jim, do you want to start? We haven't heard from you in a few minutes.
No, let Mark start.
There are so many that in the sales world, number of calls, number of dials drives me nuts. Just about every vice president of sales or sales leader, or even CEOs who understand sales, says, man, I want to stop measuring quantity. I want to start measuring quality. And then they rate people by how many times they dialed the phone, or how many lunches they've done, or how many proposals, or how many demos. They hate what they're doing, but they do it. And it's because they don't know any better, perhaps. Or it could be, you know, the old story, I learned how to do this from an old guy who learned it from a dead guy, and that's good enough for me. That drives me nuts.
Lisa, I'll jump in. I had a customer, and I was working for a company in Ireland, and I was in charge of the US, but the European folks, their salespeople, they paid them a bonus on activity. What? You know, you need activity to drive revenue, but you don't pay on activity, because activity doesn't, it will ultimately bring the revenue once you close the sale, but you don't get paid bonus, because you can have a ton of activity, they could get their bonus and never close a sale. And so paying on activity, just similar to what Mark said, just is so wrong.
on the people side, Lisa, turnover, right? That's been a stat for a long time, and the problem with it, it tells you nothing other than a trend, right? It doesn't tell you why. So any metric that doesn't give you insight into why, to me, has really limited value. Give me a metric that's a leading indicator. Why are people upset? Why don't people like their boss? Why are people not engaged? Give me those kind of metrics that can give me insight into maybe why we're having some churn.
Lisa, real quick, George Crichton put here in the chat, and he's been a sales leader for years. No value, number of sales calls, quantity over quality. He says, drives me crazy. I agree. Somebody can make 100 sales calls and never close anything. They make 3 sales calls, close all 3, and they got 100% hit rate. Wow.
Jim, I still tell this story all the time. I was, back in the days, I was a sales individual contributor. I had access to 2 appointment setters, one of whom was always getting bonus because he dialed like a madman, and one who always seemed to be getting me the good appointments. And it turns out that the compensation system in that little dialing call center that those 2 of them were in was based on how many calls you got. And the dialing machine guy had figured out that the call counter tripped at 1.5 seconds into the call. So somewhere between the first and second ring, but way before anybody could actually reach out to the phone and pick it up. So he would dial somewhere between a first ring and hit the first syllable of hello. And he was getting bonused out the yin yang for all the dials that he was making.
That's awesome. We have Pete Winters who'd like to ask a question.
Thanks, Lisa. Given the varied expertise that each of you possess, I wonder what's different in your coaching, your consulting, your practices with your clientele as relates to a hybrid work environment. So many people are returning to work, but working from home and or the office. What's changing in what it is you're delivering, what you're measuring? There's got to be some changes in each of your practices, I would imagine.
Yeah, if I could take a shot at that, Pete, great question. So we talked about culture. The culture before hybrid and virtual is not the culture that we have now. It's just completely different. People have worked from home for a while, view their job and their company very differently, and a lot don't want to go back. So to me, all the more reason to have some good people analytics, more important maybe than ever before, as to how are people feeling about working from home? How are people feeling about going back to the office? How are people feeling about the communication from their boss and from their company? So we have to kind of throw out what we thought we knew, about culture and about some aspects of leadership, and really get some new data, some new leading indicators about what's happening inside our workforce.
I think one of the key things also that's changed is we have to finally accept that the 9-to-5 day isn't how business gets done. And as leaders, we need to be in a position to be results oriented and have that focus on the outcomes for our customers. But the idea that somebody's going to sit at their desk, whether they're at home or in an office between certain business hours, the world just isn't running that way anymore. I see that John has a question for us. Go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, my question's about culture. I think it's super important, like everybody else, and it has to come from the top. My question is, when it's rotten and it's coming from the top, how do you change behavior of those people to change that culture?
I'll take a shot at that. I'll use a term Jim Hardwick used earlier. Batting average of helping a company do that isn't going to be very good, because that's the problem, John, in my experience. And if one of us can really get that top leader to see that today's workforce values culture, and they're not going to be able to so show them some data, right? Would be where I would start about what pain points they're having with attracting and retaining talent, which is a problem right now, and engage in that culture conversation.
If I could jump in here too, something that is amazing. They say that 40 or 50% of the workforce is going to change jobs this year. And I just was at a seminar where a gentleman from ADP, who does all payroll, they're top in the country. They said they did a survey, 95% of employees are thinking about quitting. Doesn't mean they're going to quit, but they're thinking about quitting. So if you've got a toxic environment, and a lot of corporate America is toxic, and if you've got a CEO who's absolutely toxic, you got to take yourself out of that situation, because unless the CEO gets run over by a bus, that's going to continue to be toxic. And I call it corporate abuse, to be very frank with you. And I'm a little cynical because of all the years I spent in corporate, but you have to make that decision. And I think a lot of people, because they've been home now, are reflecting on what's important in life. And what important in life is no longer working for the man and getting the crap kicked out of you every day. I want to feel good about myself. I want to spend time with my family. I want to do something that I feel comfortable with, not go in and get beat up at the office every day. That's one of the reasons why there's such a dramatic change. And for the first time in a long time, the employees actually have the upper hand, because they're leaving right and left, and companies are panicking. And so, John, more than ever, they got to look at culture.
Yeah, John, just to get to the real nub, if the problem is at the top, what has to happen is a come to Jesus moment. There has to be a trigger event where that executive realizes that they are the problem and they've got to change. If they don't realize they have to change, if you haven't sold them on the value of change, then nothing's going to happen. I was just on the phone earlier this morning with a HR professional who said, remember that the market for labor consists of 18 to 65-year-olds. 65-year-olds are the end of the baby boom, so they're aging out. An alarming number of people 55 to 65 are opting out. Those two generations didn't have as many children. And so now there's a lack of younger people coming into the workforce. And so, and GDP has been growing faster than job creation. So, and GDP drives job creation. GDP has been growing faster than the employment base, the worker base. So there are, for the first time in many generations, there are more jobs than qualified workers. Suddenly, your value as an employer, it's no longer a seller's market or a buyer's market. It's no longer an employer's market. And somebody has to shake that leader into believing the math.
Yeah, or replace
And John,
or replace them.
yeah, and John, your question really cuts to why we're having these conversations and the idea that I'm bringing to an audience to want to break everything. What we have all grown up with in our industries and in our careers has slowly not been working, and we have ignored it, and we have pretended that it may not be the case. Last year, everything did change, and what employees expect of the employment experience is different. What our clients and customers expect of our services and the value that we provide is higher. And we need to raise the bar and rise to the challenge. And that is the heart and soul of what this dialogue was designed to address.
Yeah.
If I could, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, there is a customer or a question in the chat from George Crichton or Crichton.
Right.
And it was, he talked about the World War II bomber example. So I saw that, my eye went to it. And so he wants to know, how do you actually measure customer satisfaction? And it's not measuring customer satisfaction that matters. It's measuring customer value. Now, you can measure when we measure in marketing, when a client when somebody out in the Ethernet or in the ethersphere has clicked on our content. But if our content is about just general corporate stuff, corporate fluff versus our features versus a unique customer outcome that our unique feature feeds, which one of those content pieces is actually more value to us? So when I produce content that is teaches a customer an outcome that they can achieve only by doing business with us, I want to get in touch with that customer who's clicking that content. When my prospecting people prospect about that outcome, that person is my customer. They just don't know it yet. They're my rightful customer because they want that outcome. So somebody who values the outcome that my differentiation feeds, we can measure the value in terms of their interest with that outcome from the first time they've clicked on our content on the internet to the time they accept an appointment, to the time we've talked about that outcome with them in our first call. And actually you can start having a conversation about how many dollars does that outcome mean for your business? What does that outcome mean for you personally in your career? So you can measure the value of your differentiated outcomes from a very early stage. Yes, it's an approximate measure, but it's the right question. George, I hope you're on still and you heard that. If not, I hope you're enjoying this on the recording.
If we want to turn it a little bit to our audience, one of our goals today was to pique your curiosity and ask you to think differently about your business and what you measure, and does it actually matter? Did we achieve that goal? Feel free to speak up or share in chat.